Okay, today we're going to go through section 10.3, the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is used when we have an equation, a quadratic equation. So you have x squared, you have x, you have a number typically equals 0. You have to get the equation to look like this first. So the x squared term, then the x term, then the number equals 0. And the quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. We will be giving this formula to you, so you don't have to memorize the formula. However, it is much easier to use the formula when you have it memorized. Some people use the tune Pop Goes the Weasel to learn this. I can't believe I'm doing this, but here it goes. X equals opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So if you sing that over and over, that will help you memorize it. When I write the quadratic formula, I still sing that in my head because that's the tool that I used to memorize this a long time ago. Okay, so on this slide, I'm just going to quickly write, and if you do want to memorize it, one of the best ways to memorize this, honestly, is to write the formula over and over and over. That just helps you to get it memorized in your brain. So x equals opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And some people also put parentheses around that b, because when you square something, if you're doing that in your calculator, you really do need to put parentheses around it. Okay, so a is the number in front of x squared. So in this one, our a is 1. B is the number in front of x, so our b is 6. And c is the number that doesn't have any x's. And remember, attach that negative, so it's negative 16. So following the formula, x equals the opposite of b, so negative 6, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 6 squared, minus 4 times our a value, 1, times our c value, negative 16. The whole thing is divided by 2 times our a value. Now, this looks like a lot, but if you break it down into step-by-step pieces, it's really not that bad. I always start with what is called the discriminant, the stuff that's underneath the radical. Start by plugging that into your calculator. So grab a calculator and type in 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 16. And I highly recommend that you put parentheses around whatever you are squaring so that whether it's positive or negative, your calculator treats it correctly. So 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 16. I'm punching that in my calculator and I get 100. So I have negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 100. The next thing that I do is I multiply whatever's on the bottom. So 2 times 1 is 2. If you can do this square root, take that square root. If it's a number that isn't a perfect square, you would need to simplify that square root. So do something with the square root next. I know that the square root of 100 is 10. So this is negative 6 plus or minus 10, all divided by 2. Now remember, plus or minus means that there's two different problems here. One of the problems is negative 6 plus 10, and then divided by 2. The other one is negative 6 minus 10, and then divided by 2. So first, negative 6 plus 10 would be 4. You have to add that entire top, then divide by 2. Negative 6 minus 10 is negative 16, and then divided by 2. So our two answers are 2 and negative 8. X equals 2 and negative 8. Now, is this square root always going to work out perfectly to be a perfect square? No. In fact, this problem probably would have been easier to solve using factoring. But sometimes the problems either aren't as easy to solve or they aren't as easy to factor, or maybe they aren't factorable at all. In this example, the first thing that we need to do is move everything over to the left side so that we have equals 0. Once we do this, we see that our A value is 2, our B value is -4, and our C value is 5. So now let's use the quadratic formula. X equals the opposite of B, so +4, plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C, the whole thing divided by 2 times A. Now notice, opposite of B. So our B is -4. We put in opposite of B as +4. And when we used B squared, I put parentheses around it. So the first step that I always do is the stuff under the radical, and I make sure that that thing that I am squaring is in parentheses. So -4 in parentheses squared minus 4 times, -4 times 2 times 5, I get -24. So this is, I do that every time, 4 plus or minus the square root of -24. The other thing I do is multiply the bottom. So this is over 4. We need to take whatever this radical is and simplify it. So I'm going to go over here, the square root of -24. Because there's a negative, I know there's going to be an I. There's a square root of -1 in there, so there's going to be an I involved. But then I think about +24. How can we split up +24 using our perfect squares? We can do 24 divided by 4. So this is the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. So it's 2i times the square root of 6. So this thing becomes 4 plus or minus this 2i square root of 6, that whole thing divided by 4. Once you are done with the quadratic formula and simplifying that radical, you need to look at the whole number pieces. So you want to look at the 4, the 2, and the 4. What do 4, 2, and 4 have in common? They all have 2 in common. You can divide all of them by 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so that just becomes I square root of 6. And 4 divided by 2 is 2. So our final answer is x equals 2 plus or minus I times the square root of 6 divided by 2. Okay, example 3. First of all, it's not equal 0. The other thing that I notice is that x squared is negative, and just like with factoring, the quadratic formula is a whole lot easier if your a value is positive. So I would add x squared to both sides so that we have 0 equals positive x squared plus 4x minus 8. So our a value is 1, our b value is 4, our c value is -8. Sorry about the screaming toddler in the background. She's watching My Little Ponies and apparently having a blast. X equals opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I want you to pause the video and give this one a try on your own. Try doing this problem on your own. See if you can get all the way to the end. Play the video once you're stuck or once you're done and you want to check your work. Okay, so x equals opposite of b, -4, plus or minus the square root of b squared, 4 squared, minus 4 times a, 1, times c, -8. The whole thing divided by 2 times our a value, which is 1. When I do the stuff under the radical, 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times -8, I get 48. Gosh, every time. So -4 plus or minus the square root of 48, and 2 times 1 is 2. So now I want to simplify the square root of 48. The square root of 48, can we do that divided by 16? We can. If you think 4 works, try 16. So this splits into the square root of 16 times the square root of 3. So that's 4 times the square root of 3. So we have negative 4 plus or minus 4 times the square root of 3 all over 2. Again, check your whole number pieces. All of those can be divided by 2. You can't ever mess with the thing under the radical. That radicand is stuck under the radical. You can't divide anything out of that. But you can check the negative 4, the 4, and the 2. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. And 2 divided by 2 is 1. And we can write it like this, but do you really need the over 1? No, you really don't. So we can delete that, and our answer is x equals negative 2 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 3. Okay, I'd like you to try example 4 on your own again. So try this again, use the quadratic formula, see if you can figure this one out on your own. Pause the video, give it a try. Okay, A is 4, B is 4, C is 1. So x equals the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Okay, the stuff under the radical. 4 squared minus 4 times 1 is 0. So we have negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 8. Well, what is the square root of 0? The square root of 0 is simply 0. And negative 4 plus 0 is negative 4. Negative 4 minus 0 is negative 4. So this problem becomes negative 4 over 8, which is negative 1/2. X equals negative 1/2. When the stuff under the radical, which is called the discriminant, when the discriminant is 0, there ends up only being one solution. The fuel economy Y in miles per gallon of a car is given by Y equals, and there's the formula, X needs to be something between 5 and 75. X is the speed in miles per hour. Find the speeds at which you can travel and have a fuel economy of 32 miles per gallon. So they're telling us that Y has to be 32. So the first thing that we're going to do is subtract 32 from both sides. Now we know that our A value is negative 0.013, our B value is 1.25, and our C value is negative 26.4. So even though these are kind of crazy numbers, I want you to try the quadratic formula on your own. Plug the numbers in, give it a try. Okay, so I've gotten to this point. I plugged everything in, I did the stuff under the radical, and so I've got this thing that I circled. We need to type this into the calculator. So I do negative 1.25 plus the square root of 0.1897, hit enter, then divide by negative 0.026, hit enter again. My first answer is 31.33. Now we do the problem again using subtraction. Negative 1.25 minus the square root of 0.1897, enter, divided by negative 0.026, enter, and I get 64.83. So this is about 31 miles per hour and about 65 miles per hour. So the question was, at what speeds can you travel and have a fuel economy of 32 miles per gallon? Those two speeds would be at about 31 miles per hour and about 65 miles per hour. Those are the two speeds at which this thing is going to end up equaling 32. Okay, And here's your assignment for section 10.3. It's only a couple of problems because of the quadratic formula. Make sure you show all of your work on your paper.